I was 37 years old when I stopped counting. 1,000 deaths. Maybe more. I stopped because the number didn't matter anymore, because each face had blurred into the next, because I'd learned to turn off whatever part of me used to feel something when a heart stopped beating. I was standing in the hallway of Sacred Heart Medical Center at 4:32 in the morning, still wearing my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and something else I could never quite wash off, when I realized I didn't believe in anything anymore. Not God, not heaven. Not even the idea that any of this meant something. The fluorescent lights were buzzing above me, that persistent hum that becomes the soundtrack of your life when you work nights, and I just stood there, staring at the scuff marks on the linoleum floor, wondering how I'd gotten to this point, how I'd become so hollow. And that's when everything started to fall apart. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and for 15 years, I'd been an emergency room physician in downtown Seattle. 15 years of trauma bays and code blues and families collapsing in waiting rooms. 15 years of making split-second decisions that determined whether someone lived or died. 15 years of watching human bodies fail in every way they possibly could. If you're watching this, would you do me a favor? Just tap that like button and subscribe to this channel. I know it seems like a small thing, but it helps more people hear stories like mine. Stories about what happens when everything you believe gets turned upside down. Stories about finding truth in the last place you'd ever expect to look. I grew up in a household where science was religion. My father, Dr. James Chen, was a physicist at MIT, specializing in quantum mechanics. My mother, Dr. Linda Chen, was a mathematician who taught at Boston University. Our dinner table conversations revolved around theorems and experiments and the beautiful, cold logic of the universe. We didn't go to church on Sundays. We went to the Museum of Natural History. We didn't pray before meals. We discussed peer-reviewed journals and debated scientific theories. I was 12 years old when my father sat me down in his study, surrounded by books with titles like The Selfish Gene and The God Delusion, and explained, very gently, very patiently, that death was simply the cessation of biological functions. When the brain stops receiving oxygen, Sarah, consciousness ends. There's no soul, no afterlife, just the beautiful, terrible reality of chemistry and physics. I remember nodding, feeling oddly comforted by the certainty of it. No mystery, no fear, no unanswerable questions. Just fact, just reality, just the way things were. My parents weren't cruel about it. They never mocked religious people, at least not in front of me. But there was always this implicit understanding that faith was for people who couldn't handle the truth, that believing in God was a crutch for those who weren't strong enough or smart enough to accept that we're alone in an indifferent universe. I remember my mother once saying, after we passed a church on our way home from a museum, "Those poor people, spending their lives preparing for something that doesn't exist. What a waste." I was maybe 14 at the time, and I agreed with her completely. It seemed so obvious, so self-evident. Of course, there was no God. Of course, death was the end. How could anyone look at the evidence and conclude otherwise? Medical school reinforced everything I already believed. 4 years at Johns Hopkins, surrounded by the best and brightest, all of us united in the understanding that human beings were biological machines. Nothing more, nothing less. I remember my first anatomy lab during my first year. 24 of us standing around metal tables, each with a cadaver, each with a body that used to be a person. Our instructor, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Reeves, told us, "These were people once. They had names, families, dreams. But now they're teaching tools. That's the reality. When we die, we become meat. Beautiful, intricate meat that can teach the living, but meat nonetheless. There's no ghost in this machine. Just the machine. I held a human heart in my hands during my second year. It was smaller than I expected. This muscle that people wrote poetry about, that they claimed held love and spirit and the image of God. I could see the ventricles, the atria, the vessels branching out like rivers on a map. It was remarkable engineering, millions of years of evolution producing this incredible pump. But it was just tissue, just cells, just protein and fat and muscle fiber. Nothing sacred, nothing divine. My professor, Dr. Jonathan Weinstein, used to say during our cardiology unit, "We're biological machines, people. Incredible machines, but machines nonetheless. When the parts fail, the machine stops. That's all death is. Don't romanticize it. Don't mystify it. It's mechanical failure, period." I believed him completely. I believed him with every fiber of my being. My first death was during my residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. A 49-year-old man named David something, I don't remember his last name, cardiac arrest, DOA, dead on arrival. He'd collapsed at a Red Sox game, they told me. One minute he was eating a hot dog and cheering. The next minute he was on the ground. His wife had performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Too much time had passed. Too much damage had been done. I watched my attending physician, Dr. Marcus Reed, call it time of death, 7:47 p.m. I watched him pull the sheet over the man's face, watched him strip off his gloves and toss them in the biohazard bin, watched him move on to the next patient without pause, without emotion, without any indication that something significant had just happened. A man had just ceased to exist, and we all just moved on. Because that's what you do. That's medicine. I felt nothing. Maybe a little sadness for the family, for the wife who tried so hard to save him. But intellectually, I understood this was simply the natural order. The man's heart had failed. His brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. The machine had stopped working. We'd done everything we could with the tools available, and it wasn't enough. That's medicine. That's life. That's death. There was no tragedy to it beyond the temporary sadness of the survivors. In 100 years, everyone who remembered him would be dead too. In 1,000 years, it would be like he never existed. That's reality. Cold, final, true. For 15 years, that's how I operated. I became very good at my job, very efficient, very skilled. People praised my composure, my ability to make split-second decisions without emotion clouding my judgment. I was the doctor you wanted in a crisis because I didn't panic, I didn't freeze, I didn't let sentiment interfere with optimal medical care. Ice Queen, one of the younger nurses called me once, not realizing I could hear her. She was talking to another nurse by the medication dispensary, and I was around the corner filling out a chart. Dr. Chen is brilliant, but God, she's cold. I've never seen her cry. Never seen her even flinch. It's like she's a robot or something. The other nurse laughed and said something about how maybe that's what you had to become to survive in emergency medicine. She meant it as a criticism, but I took it as a compliment. Emotion got people killed in the ER. Hesitation got people killed. Second-guessing got people killed. Detachment saved lives. Efficiency saved lives. Cold, calculated decision-making saved lives. I moved to Seattle 8 years ago for a position at Sacred Heart Medical Center, one of the busiest trauma centers in the Pacific Northwest. Better pay, better resources, better opportunities for advancement. I bought a small apartment in Capitol Hill, close enough to walk to work if I wanted to, though I usually drove. I didn't decorate much. Some furniture from IKEA. Some prints on the walls that came with the frames. Some plants that died within 6 months because I forgot to water them. It didn't matter. I was barely there anyway. I worked the night shift mostly, 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. Those were the hours when Seattle showed you its real face. when the city stripped away its coffee shop charm and showed you the raw, ugly truth of human existence. Overdoses and car accidents and domestic violence and strokes and heart attacks and shootings and stabbings and every possible way a human body could fail or be failed by someone else. I saw teenagers die from fentanyl-laced pills they'd bought from someone they trusted. I saw elderly couples where one would die and the other would follow within hours, their bodies just giving up, their will to live evaporating with their partner. I saw young mothers bleed out from complications no one had predicted, their babies crying in the next room while we pumped blood into bodies that couldn't hold it anymore. I saw children who never had a chance, born with defects that medicine couldn't fix, their parents clutching them and begging us to do something, anything, while we stood there helpless. And I saw how people died differently. That's the thing nobody talks about in medical school. They teach you physiology. They teach you the stages of death, the biological cascade that occurs when oxygen stops reaching the brain. They teach you about rigor mortis and livor mortis, and all the ways a body breaks down after death. But they don't teach you about the moment itself, about how different it looks from person to person, about the patterns you start to see after you've witnessed enough deaths. Some people fought it, clawing and gasping and terrified right until the end. Their eyes would go wide with panic. Their hands would grab at anything, anyone, desperately trying to hold on to life. I watched a 62-year-old woman with stage 4 lung cancer spend her last 5 minutes in absolute terror, gasping, "No, no, no, I'm not ready, I'm not ready," while her daughter sobbed beside her. The fear in her eyes was primal, ancient, the fear of every human who's ever faced the abyss and understood they were about to fall into it. Some people just seemed tired, ready, like they were walking into another room. These were usually the elderly, the ones who'd lived long lives and buried most of their friends. They'd close their eyes, take a few shallow breaths, and just slip away. Quietly, peacefully. Not because they saw something beautiful, but because they were exhausted, because their bodies had fought long enough and they were ready to rest. But there were others, maybe one in every 20 or 30, who died with this look on their faces that I couldn't categorize, couldn't explain, couldn't dismiss as easily as the others. Peace. Not resignation, not sedation, not the glassy-eyed nothing of brain death. Peace. Active, aware peace. Like they were seeing something the rest of us couldn't see. Like they knew something we didn't. Like they were witnessing something that made everything okay. That made death not just bearable, but welcome. I explained it away, of course. Endorphins. The brain's natural opioids flooding the system in the final moments. Hypoxia. Lack of oxygen creating hallucinations. Creating the famous tunnel of light that near-death experiencers described. The brain's way of easing the transition. An evolutionary adaptation to make death less traumatic, less terrifying, so that our ancestors could face it with dignity instead of panic. There was always a scientific explanation. There had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. The first real crack in my certainty came on a Tuesday night in October, 3 years ago. The date was October 17th. I remember because it was 2 days after my 35th birthday, which I'd spent alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and a medical journal. We brought in a woman from a car accident on Highway 99, 32 years old, massive internal bleeding from a ruptured spleen and lacerated liver. Her name was Rebecca Morrison. I remember because I had to sign the death certificate later. She'd been T-boned by a drunk driver running a red light. The drunk driver walked away with minor injuries. Rebecca was dying. We worked on her for 47 minutes. I remember looking at the clock, watching the minutes tick by while we pumped blood into her, while we tried to clamp off the bleeders, while we did everything we possibly could with the resources we had. But the damage was too extensive. Too much blood loss. Too much time had passed between the accident and arrival. She was conscious for some of it, fading in and out, her blood pressure dropping, her heart struggling. We'd given her pain medication, but she was still aware, still there, her eyes moving, her lips moving. At one point, maybe 5 minutes before she died, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak, her lips were blue, her skin was cold and clammy, but she looked right at me, right into my eyes, and said, "He's here. Can you see him? He's so beautiful." Her voice was barely a whisper, her breathing shallow and rapid, but her eyes were clear, focused, not confused, not delirious, clear. I checked her pupils with my penlight. Equal and reactive. Possible head trauma, possible hallucination from blood loss and shock and the medications we'd given her. "Stay with me, Rebecca," I told her, squeezing her hand. "We're doing everything we can. Just stay with me." "Don't be afraid," she whispered. And she was smiling now, actually smiling, blood on her teeth, dying on my table. And she was smiling. "Tell my kids don't be afraid. He's real. He's really real. Jesus is real." Then her eyes closed. Her hand went limp in mine, and the monitor flatlined. We tried to resuscitate her. 2 rounds of CPR, epinephrine, the whole protocol. But she was gone, 32 years old, 2 kids at home, ages 7 and 9, a husband in the waiting room who collapsed when I told him. Gone. I thought about her for days afterward. Couldn't shake it. The smile, the certainty in her voice, the peace on her face even as she was dying a violent, traumatic death. I'd seen dying people hallucinate before, seen them reach for loved ones who weren't there, seen them talk to empty corners of the room, calling out names of people who'd died years ago. But this felt different. She wasn't confused. She wasn't scared. She wasn't calling out for someone from her past. She was trying to comfort me. She was trying to tell me something important, something she believed with absolute conviction in her final moments. I told myself it was the stress. I'd been working 70, sometimes 80-hour weeks for months. We were short-staffed. We were always short-staffed, and I was covering extra shifts to help out. I was tired. That's all it was. I was reading too much into a dying woman's hallucination because I was exhausted and emotionally depleted. Then it happened again. 3 weeks later, a 17-year-old kid named Marcus Williams shot in a drive-by in the Central District. Gang violence. Wrong place, wrong time. He wasn't even in a gang, his mother told me later. He was just walking home from his job at a grocery store. Someone shot him from a passing car. 3 bullets. 1 in the abdomen, 1 in the chest, 1 that grazed his head. We got him stabilized initially, got him to surgery, but he crashed on the table. By the time they wheeled him back to us, he was gone. But in that moment before, when he was conscious and bleeding and terrified, he'd grabbed the surgeon's hand and said, "Tell my mom I saw the light. Tell her it's real. Tell her Jesus was waiting for me." The surgeon, Dr. Patricia Okafor, told me about it in the break room afterward. She was shaken, which was unusual for her. Patricia had been a trauma surgeon for 20 years, and I'd never seen her fazed by anything. "He was so sure," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "He was dying. He had to know he was dying, and he wasn't scared. He was happy, like he was going somewhere good." "Endorphins," I said automatically. "The brain floods with natural opioids when it's dying. It creates euphoria sometimes, makes people hallucinate." "I know the science, Sarah," Patricia said quietly. "I'm just telling you what I saw. That kid saw something. I don't know what, but he saw something." Then it happened again, and again, and again. An 81-year-old man named George Patterson with end-stage pancreatic cancer who'd been declining for weeks. He'd been unresponsive for 3 days, and we all thought he was already gone, mentally. But then, 10 seconds before his heart stopped, he opened his eyes, looked at his grandson sitting beside the bed, and said clear as day, "Oh, I understand now. It's all love. Everything is love." Then he smiled, closed his eyes, and died. A woman in her 50s named Amanda Rodriguez, massive stroke, left side completely paralyzed, unable to speak. We'd intubated her, she was on a ventilator. Her family had just agreed to withdraw care. When we removed the breathing tube, when she had maybe 2 minutes of life left, she opened her eyes and couldn't speak, but kept pointing upward with her right hand, tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, not scared tears. Tears of joy, of recognition, of seeing something overwhelming and beautiful. She pointed up until her hand fell and her eyes closed, and she was gone. A 43-year-old man named Brian Hollis. Heart attack at the gym. His heart stopped, and we got it started again. But it stopped again 2 hours later in the ICU. In those moments when he was conscious between the arrests, he kept saying, "He's coming for me. He's coming. I can feel him. Don't be sad. He's coming to take me home." I started keeping notes, not official records, just observations in a journal I kept in my locker at work. By the end of that year, I documented 43 deaths where the patient exhibited what I called anomalous, peaceful affect, with apparent visual or auditory hallucination of positive content. I was trying to study it, you understand. Trying to find the pattern, the explanation, the neurological mechanism that would make sense of it all. Maybe it was a particular type of brain chemistry. Maybe certain personality types were predisposed to this kind of death experience. Maybe there was a genetic component, some variation in neurotransmitter receptors that made some people's brains produce more intense hallucinations at the moment of death. I didn't want to believe in anything. I just wanted to understand. I wanted the data to tell me what was happening, but the data didn't cooperate. There was no pattern in age, no pattern in cause of death, no pattern in medical history or personality type or anything else I could measure. The only pattern was that the people who died this way, who died with peace and joy, and that look of seeing something beautiful, were almost always people who'd been religious. Almost always people who'd believed in Jesus. Not all religious people died that way. I watched devout Christians die in fear, die in pain, die begging God to save them. I watched people from other faiths, Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, die peacefully too sometimes, though less frequently. But the correlation was undeniable. The people who died seeing Jesus, who died with that absolute certainty and peace, were Christians, believers, people who'd spent their lives trusting in something I'd spent my life dismissing as delusion. Hey, I know you're listening to this from somewhere in the world right now. Would you comment below and tell me where you're watching from? What city? What country? Sometimes when I was working those night shifts, especially in those early morning hours when the hospital was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts and the weight of all those deaths, I felt so isolated in what I was seeing, so alone in my questions. It helps to know I'm not alone now, that maybe you're hearing this and it's resonating with something you've experienced too. That maybe someone out there understands what it's like to have everything you believe challenged by what you witness. So please, just take a second and let me know where you are. It means more than you might think. The night everything changed was a Friday in March, 2 years ago, March 23rd. I remember because it was my cousin Jennifer's birthday, and I'd meant to call her, but forgot because of what happened. We had a mass casualty event, a tour bus full of elderly tourists that went off an overpass on Interstate 5. The bus company had been cutting corners on maintenance, we found out later, and the brakes failed. The bus crashed through the guardrail, fell 30 feet, landed on its side on the road below. 17 patients, 6 dead on arrival, 11 critical. It was chaos. Organized chaos, the kind I'd trained for, the kind we drilled for, but chaos nonetheless. Every available doctor, every nurse, every tech was mobilized. We converted 2 regular bays into trauma bays. The waiting room was packed with families. The chaplain was running between rooms. The smell of blood and fear was everywhere. I was running between trauma bays, making calls, delegating, triaging, doing what I do. A 73-year-old woman with massive head trauma and internal bleeding. A 68-year-old man with a crushed pelvis and shattered femurs. A 79-year-old woman with a punctured lung and broken ribs. An 81-year-old man in cardiac arrest. We lost 4 more that night, bringing the total to 10 dead. 10 people who'd gotten on a bus that morning, expecting to see the Space Needle and Pike Place Market, who'd never make it home. I was elbow deep in someone's chest cavity at one point, doing open cardiac massage, feeling their heart stutter and stop under my hands, feeling the muscle go from struggling to still. We couldn't bring them back. I called it, moved to the next patient, kept working, kept trying, kept failing. By 7 in the morning, we'd stabilized the survivors. 10 dead total, 7 who'd make it, though some with life-changing injuries. I went to the bathroom, scrubbed the blood off my arms, my hands, from under my fingernails. I looked at myself in the mirror under those harsh fluorescent lights. I looked old, older than 37. My eyes were hollow. I had blood in my hair somehow. My scrubs were ruined. I'd showered and changed into clean scrubs, but I could still smell it. The blood, the death. Or maybe I was imagining it. Or maybe it was just permanently embedded in my sinuses after 15 years, part of me now, something I'd never be free of. I sat down in the break room with a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the burner for 6 hours. It tasted like burnt rubber and chemicals. The break room was empty. Everyone else had gone home, or was catching sleep in the on-call rooms, or was finishing up paperwork. I was supposed to leave an hour ago, but I couldn't make myself move. I just sat there in that plastic chair, holding that terrible coffee, thinking about the 17-year-old girl who'd died around 3 in the morning. She hadn't been on the bus. She'd been in a car that the bus landed on when it fell. Wrong place, wrong time. Her name was Emma Kowalski. She was a senior in high school. She'd been on her way home from a friend's house. The bus had crushed the driver's side of her car. She'd been awake when they brought her in, kept asking for her mom. "Where's my mom? I want my mom. Someone call my mom." Her injuries were too severe. Massive internal trauma. We couldn't get her stabilized enough to bring the mother back to see her before she died. The girl died asking for her, died scared and alone, and wanting her mother. I had to go out to the waiting room afterward and tell a woman named Patricia Kowalski that her only daughter was gone, that Emma had died, that we'd done everything we could. I delivered that kind of news hundreds of times before, maybe thousands. You develop a script, a way of saying it that's clear but compassionate. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. She didn't suffer." Lies, usually, but kind lies, necessary lies. Patricia Kowalski had collapsed, just dropped to the floor, wailing in a way that didn't sound human, that sounded like something being torn apart. Security had to help her to a chair. She kept saying, "Not Emma. Please, not Emma. She's all I have. She's all I have. Bring her back. Please bring her back." Over and over, rocking back and forth, her entire world destroyed in the space of 3 words. "Your daughter died." I delivered that kind of news hundreds of times before. It never bothered me, or I never let it bother me. I'd built walls. Good walls. Necessary walls. but something about that mother's face, about the way everything she was, had just shattered in an instant, about the absolute meaningless randomness of a 17-year-old girl dying because a bus company cut corners on brake maintenance, and a bus driver had a heart attack at the exact wrong moment, and she happened to be driving on that street at that exact time. Something about it all just broke something in me. I sat in that break room and thought, this is it. This is all there is. We're born by accident. We suffer randomly. Some of us try to reduce the suffering. And then we die, and it means absolutely nothing. There's no plan, no purpose, no justice, no reason. Just chaos and biology and entropy, and the universe grinding forward without caring about any of us, without even noticing us. We're specks. We're nothing. We live and we die, and the universe doesn't blink. It was the most honest I'd been with myself in years, maybe ever, and it was crushing, absolutely crushing. The weight of it was unbearable. I drove home as the sun was coming up, the streets empty, the city just starting to wake up. Joggers and people walking dogs and the early shift heading to work, all these people going about their lives. And all I could think was, you're all going to die, every single one of you, and it won't mean anything, and no one will remember you. And that's the truth everyone is too afraid to face. I got to my apartment in Capitol Hill, climbed the 3 flights of stairs, unlocked my door, and just stood in my living room. I hadn't cleaned in weeks, maybe months. There were medical journals stacked on the coffee table, takeout containers in the kitchen sink, a layer of dust on everything. The plants on the windowsill were brown and dead. I'd moved to Seattle 8 years ago for this job, and I'd built exactly nothing outside of it. No relationship, no hobbies, no friends I saw regularly, no life. Just work and sleep and work and sleep and 1,000 deaths. I didn't cry. I wanted to, I think, but I couldn't. I'd forgotten how. I just felt empty, completely, utterly empty, like there was nothing inside me anymore, like I'd scooped myself out over the years to make room for all the death, and now there was just a shell. I called in sick for the first time in 5 years, told them I needed a few days. My supervisor, Linda Martinez, didn't even question it. "Take a week," she said. "Take 2 weeks. You've earned it. You've been burning way too hot for way too long, Sarah. We've all been worried about you." I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, it was dark again. I didn't know what day it was for a minute. Saturday evening. I made tea, chamomile, sat by my window, looking out at the city lights. All those people in all those buildings, all of them convinced their lives mattered, that their struggles and joys and loves and losses meant something. And I thought about Rebecca Morrison. "He's here. Can you see him? He's so beautiful. Jesus is real." What had she seen? What had any of them seen? Was it just neurons firing randomly in oxygen-deprived brains? One last desperate hallucination before the darkness? Or was there something I was missing? Something I'd been trained to ignore? Something I'd dismissed for 37 years without ever actually investigating? I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and searched for near-death experiences. I'd always dismissed them as hallucinations, as the brain's last gasp, as wishful thinking by people afraid to face oblivion. But I'd never actually read the research. I'd never looked at the data. I just assumed I knew the answer. I spent 3 hours going down that rabbit hole. Thousands of documented cases, people who'd been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, who came back describing things they couldn't have known, describing conversations that happened in other rooms while they were unconscious, describing the layout of the hospital, of rooms they'd never been in, seen from above, describing deceased relatives they'd never met, who the family confirmed looked exactly as the patient described, A woman who'd been blind from birth, who described the colors and patterns of the doctor's clothing during her resuscitation. A man who'd been dead for 17 minutes, who came back and repeated verbatim a conversation between two nurses in the hallway outside his room. The scientific explanations were there too, of course. Theories about DMT released during death. Theories about temporal lobe activity creating hallucinations. Theories about false memories constructed after the fact. The brain filling in details it couldn't possibly know. Theories about anecdotal evidence being unreliable. About confirmation bias. About the plural of anecdote not being data. But the explanations felt thin, forced. Like we were working backward from a conclusion we'd already decided on, trying to make the evidence fit our worldview instead of letting the evidence lead us where it wanted to go. I'd done the same thing, I realized. For 15 years, I'd been witnessing these deaths, these anomalous, peaceful deaths, and I'd been forcing them into my atheistic framework instead of asking the harder question, what if I'm wrong? What if there really is something more? What if all these people aren't hallucinating? What if they're seeing clearly for the first time? I closed the laptop feeling more confused than ever, more unsettled, more like the ground beneath me was cracking. The next day, Sunday, I did something even stranger. I went to a church. I don't know why. I wasn't planning to. I was just driving, aimless, trying to clear my head, and I saw this small building with a white steeple, Fremont Community Church, on a wooden sign out front. It was a Sunday morning, around 10:30. I parked across the street and watched people go in. Families holding hands, old couples walking slowly, young professionals in jeans. They looked normal, not crazy, not stupid, not weak. Just normal people who apparently believed in something I'd spent my entire life dismissing as fairy tales for people who couldn't handle reality. I almost left 3 times, put my hand on the keys, ready to start the car and drive away and forget this moment of insanity. But finally, 10 minutes after the service started, I turned off the car, crossed the street, and went in. It was a small sanctuary, maybe 70 or 80 people. Wood pews, stained glass windows, a simple cross at the front. Nothing fancy, nothing intimidating. I slipped into the very back pew, trying to be invisible. They were singing when I walked in, some song I didn't know, something about amazing grace and how sweet the sound. Everyone around me was singing, holding books. Some people had their eyes closed, some had their hands raised. I felt absurdly out of place. I was wearing jeans and an old hoodie from medical school. I probably still looked exhausted, haunted. A woman next to me, maybe 60 years old with kind eyes, smiled and handed me a hymnal, pointing to the right page. I took it, but didn't sing. I just stood there, listening. The pastor was young, maybe 40, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. Not the fire and brimstone type I'd expected. Not the judgmental, angry preacher I'd seen on television. Just a normal guy who happened to believe in God. When he started talking, when the singing ended and everyone sat down, he started talking about doubt. About Thomas, one of Jesus' disciples, who didn't believe Jesus had risen from the dead until he could touch the wounds himself. If you're here today and you're not sure you believe any of this, he said, looking around the room like he was talking to each person individually, you're in the right place. Faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's not about having all the answers. It's not about pretending you're certain when you're not. Faith is what you do with your doubt. It's whether you're willing to ask the hard questions and sit with the discomfort of not having all the answers immediately. It's whether you're willing to investigate, to seek, to knock on the door, even when you're not sure anyone's home. I felt like he was talking directly to me, like somehow he knew I was sitting there, a skeptical atheist doctor who'd wandered in off the street, and he was speaking to exactly what I needed to hear. He told the story from the Bible, from the book of John. Jesus had been crucified, died, buried. 3 days later, the disciples saw him alive again. But Thomas wasn't there. And when the others told him, "We've seen the Lord," Thomas said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." "That's doubt," the pastor said. "That's honest, reasonable, scientific doubt." Thomas wanted evidence. He wanted proof. He wasn't willing to believe based on someone else's testimony. He needed to see for himself. And you know what? Jesus didn't condemn him for it. A week later, Jesus appeared again, and this time Thomas was there. And Jesus said to him, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand, and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Jesus invited him to investigate, to test, to verify, because God can handle your questions. He can handle your skepticism. He can handle your doubt. He's big enough for that. Something in my chest tightened. I'd always thought faith required you to turn off your brain, to just accept things without evidence, to take a blind leap into irrationality. But this man was saying the opposite. He was saying it was okay to investigate, to question, to need proof, to be like Thomas, to say, "I need to see before I can believe." After the service, people stood around talking, drinking coffee from paper cups, laughing. A few people smiled at me, but nobody pressured me to talk. Nobody cornered me with questions. I slipped out a side door and sat in my car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. I felt ridiculous. I was a doctor, a scientist, a rational person with advanced degrees and 15 years of experience in evidence-based medicine. What was I doing in a church of all places, listening to stories about a man who supposedly rose from the dead 2,000 years ago? But I also couldn't deny that something had shifted. Some small door had opened, some tiny crack in the certainty I'd built my entire life on. I went back the next Sunday, and the one after that. I didn't tell anyone, didn't tell my colleagues, didn't tell my family, didn't call my parents. I just went, sat in the back, listened. The pastor, his name was David Patterson, talked about different things each week. About love, about forgiveness, about suffering, about hope, about this man, Jesus, who claimed to be God, who lived and taught and healed, and then died the most brutal death imaginable, and then came back to life. I started reading the Bible. I checked one out from the church library, a modern translation that was easier to understand than the King James Version I'd tried to read once as a teenager. I approached it like I would any other historical text. Who wrote this? When? What was the context? What were the sources? What were the claims being made? The claims were extraordinary. A man who claimed to be God incarnate, who performed miracles, who said things like, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me," who forgave sins, who accepted worship, who said, "Before Abraham was, I am," using the same name God used with Moses at the burning bush, who claimed that he and the Father were one. Either this man was who he said he was, or he was a lunatic, or he was a liar. There was no middle ground. C.S. Lewis had written about this, I discovered. The trilemma. Jesus couldn't just be a good moral teacher. Good moral teachers don't claim to be God. Either he was actually God, or he was deluded, or he was deliberately deceiving people. Those were the only options. And if he was God, if he really did die and rise again, it changed everything. Everything. It meant death wasn't the end. It meant there was purpose. It meant the universe wasn't indifferent. It meant all those people I'd watched die seeing Jesus weren't hallucinating. They were seeing reality more clearly than I'd ever seen it. If it was true, it changed everything. If it wasn't, it was the most elaborate delusion in human history, and I needed to understand why billions of people across 2,000 years had fallen for it. I needed to know which one it was. I started reading everything I could find: Christian apologetics, atheist rebuttals, historical evidence for the resurrection, alternative explanations for the empty tomb. I read C.S. Lewis and Richard Dawkins and Lee Strobel and Christopher Hitchens and N.T. Wright and Bart Ehrman. I read about the historical reliability of the New Testament documents. I read about the conversion of the Apostle Paul, a man who'd been violently opposed to Christianity until he claimed to see the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus. I read about the martyrdom of the early disciples, men who died brutal deaths for testifying that they'd seen Jesus alive after his crucifixion. I read about the explosive growth of Christianity despite every worldly disadvantage, despite brutal persecution, despite having no political power, no military force, no wealth, no social status. I approached it like a diagnosis, like a differential, looking at all the symptoms, all the evidence, trying to find what fit, trying to find the explanation that made the most sense of all the data. And the thing was, the more I read, the more I couldn't dismiss it. The historical evidence for Jesus' existence was stronger than the evidence for most ancient figures I'd never questioned, like Socrates or Plato. The manuscript evidence for the New Testament was far better than for any other ancient document. The transformation of the disciples from terrified deserters who abandoned Jesus at his arrest to bold proclaimers who died for their testimony didn't make sense unless something extraordinary had happened. The growth of Christianity, despite brutal persecution, despite having every worldly disadvantage, defied normal sociological patterns. The inability of the Jewish or Roman authorities to produce Jesus' body when all they had to do to kill Christianity in its cradle was point to a corpse didn't make sense if he was still dead. People didn't die for what they knew to be a lie. The disciples claimed they'd seen Jesus alive, touched him, eaten with him, and they died for that claim. All of them except John, and they tried to kill him too. People die for false beliefs all the time, sure, but people don't die for what they know is false, and the disciples would have known if they'd made it up. But more than the intellectual arguments, more than the historical evidence, there were the deaths I kept witnessing. I'd gone back to work after my week off, and I couldn't unsee what I was seeing anymore, couldn't explain it away, couldn't force it into my old framework. The peace, the joy, the absolute certainty in the faces of people who died believing in Jesus. I'd watched atheists die in terror, clinging to life with everything they had, because they believed this was all there was. I'd watched agnostics die with quiet resignation, accepting the void. But I'd watched Christians die like they were going home, like someone they loved was waiting for them, like death was a doorway, not a wall, not all of them. Some Christians died afraid too. Some died angry at God, or confused, or in pain that eclipsed everything else. But the ones who really believed, who really knew Jesus, not just knew about him, but knew him personally, intimately, the way you know someone you love. They died differently. They died with hope. I couldn't explain it away anymore. I couldn't keep pretending it was just endorphins or hypoxia or wishful thinking. I'd seen too much. I'd watched too many people die, seeing something that transformed their fear into peace. And it was always Jesus, always him. Not a generic light, not a vague presence. Jesus, by name. The same Jesus who'd claimed to be the resurrection and the life, who'd said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The breaking point came 6 months after I first walked into that church. 6 months of reading, questioning, investigating, attending services, sitting in the back pew, listening. 6 months of the walls cracking. 6 months of the certainty I'd built my life on crumbling piece by piece. We had a patient, 73-year-old man named Robert Hutchins. End-stage heart failure. He'd been in and out of the ICU for weeks. We'd done everything we could. Medications, procedures, interventions. But his heart was giving out. His body was giving out. His family had finally agreed to DNR status, to comfort care only. No more interventions. No more attempts at resuscitation. Just morphine for comfort and time to say goodbye. I was on shift when he started actively dying. His daughter, a woman in her 40s named Jennifer, was with him, holding his hand, reading to him from the Bible, Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." I was checking his vitals, just monitoring, making sure he was comfortable, that the morphine was adequate. Just being present. Robert hadn't been conscious in 3 days. His breathing was shallow, irregular, the death rattle in his throat. I expected him to slip away quietly, peacefully, any minute. Then he opened his eyes. He hadn't been conscious in 3 days, and suddenly his eyes were open, clear, focused. He looked at his daughter and squeezed her hand. "I see him, sweetheart," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I see Jesus. He's right here. He's been here the whole time. He never left." Jennifer started crying, holding his hand to her cheek. "I love you, Dad. I love you so much." "I love you too, honey. Tell your brother I love him. Tell your mom I'll see her soon." Then Robert looked at me, looked right at me with eyes that were completely clear, completely lucid, completely at peace. "Doctor," he said, "it's all true, every word. Don't waste your life pretending it's not. He's real. He loves you. He's waiting for you." Then he closed his eyes, took one more shallow breath, and his heart stopped, just like that. Peacefully, like falling asleep, like coming home. I stood there with my stethoscope against his chest, listening to silence, and something in me just surrendered. I couldn't fight it anymore. I couldn't keep running from it. I couldn't keep pretending that all of this was random, that consciousness was just neurons, that love was just chemistry, that every single one of these people seeing Jesus at the moment of death was just hallucinating the same hallucination. What if they weren't hallucinating? What if they were seeing clearly for the first time in their lives? What if I was the one who'd been blind? What if Jesus really was who he said he was? What if he really had conquered death? What if he really was standing there, in that room, invisible to me, but visible to Robert, waiting to take him home? I finished my shift in a daze, somehow went through the motions, saw other patients, made other decisions, signed other charts, but I wasn't really there. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere between the world I'd always known and a world I was just beginning to see. I drove home as the sun was coming up. Monday morning, March 26th. I remember because it was the day my life divided into before and after. I got to my apartment, sat on my couch in the early morning light, and I did something I never thought I'd do. I prayed. I didn't even know how to pray, really, but I just started talking out loud. "Jesus, if you're real, I need to know. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep watching people die and pretending it doesn't mean anything. I can't keep pretending I have it all figured out when I don't. I'm tired. I'm empty. I'm broken. And if you're real, if you're really who you said you were, if Robert saw you, if Rebecca saw you, if all of them saw you, I need you to show me. Please, I need to know. Nothing dramatic happened. No lightning bolt. No audible voice. No vision of Jesus appearing in my living room. But I felt something. A presence. A warmth. A peace that didn't make logical sense given my circumstances, given the fact that I was exhausted and confused, and my entire worldview was collapsing. It was like someone had been standing outside a locked door my whole life, knocking quietly, patiently, waiting. And I'd finally stopped running, finally stopped arguing, finally stopped insisting I didn't need anything or anyone. And I'd opened the door, and he'd been there all along, waiting, just waiting for me to let him in. I started crying then, really crying, for the first time in maybe 20 years. Ugly, gut-wrenching sobs. Crying for all the deaths I'd witnessed. Crying for all the years I'd wasted thinking I had it all figured out. Crying for all the pride and arrogance and certainty that had kept me from seeing the truth. Crying because I suddenly understood, with absolute clarity, that I'd been so wrong about everything that mattered. I cried for an hour, maybe more. When I finally stopped, when I'd cried myself empty, it was full daylight outside. Birds were singing. I could hear traffic, life continuing, the world still turning. But I was different. Something fundamental had shifted. Some core piece of me had transformed. I felt exhausted and clean and terrified and relieved all at once. I felt like I'd been carrying a 1,000-pound weight my entire life, and I'd finally set it down. I felt seen, known, loved. For the first time in my life, truly loved. Not for what I could do or achieve or accomplish, but just for being me. Broken, skeptical, empty me. I picked up my phone. It was 8:37 in the morning. I texted Pastor David, the man whose sermons I'd been listening to for 6 months. "I think I'm ready," I wrote. "I think I believe. What do I do now?" He responded in 2 minutes. "Welcome home, Sarah. Come by the church today if you can. Noon. We'll talk. You just took the most important step of your life." I met him at noon. Sat in his office, a small room with books lining the walls, and a worn leather chair and a window overlooking the parking lot. I told him everything. About the deaths I'd witnessed. About my atheist upbringing. About my certainty that had crumbled. About Robert Hutchins dying and seeing Jesus. About the prayer I'd prayed that morning. About the peace I couldn't explain. "I think I believe," I said. I think Jesus is real. I think he's who he said he was. I think he died for my sins, for everyone's sins, and rose from the dead. I think it's all true, but I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what comes next." Pastor David smiled. "What comes next is the rest of your life. You follow him. You learn from him. You become his disciple. It's that simple and that complicated." How do I officially do this? Is there a ceremony or something?" "There can be," he said. "Eventually, you'll want to be baptized, to publicly declare your faith. But salvation isn't about ceremony. It's about the heart. About surrendering. About trusting. You've already done that. You've already believed. That's it. That's salvation. Jesus says, 'Whoever believes in me has eternal life.' You believe. You have eternal life. Welcome to the family." We prayed together that afternoon. A simple prayer. I told Jesus I believed in him, that I trusted him, that I was sorry for all the years I'd rejected him, all the pride, all the arrogance, all the certainty that I knew better, that I needed him to forgive me, to save me, to transform me, that I wanted to follow him for the rest of my life. And that was it. I was a Christian. Everything changed, and nothing changed. I was still Dr. Sarah Chen, still an emergency room physician at Sacred Heart Medical Center, still worked the same night shifts, saw the same kinds of trauma, watched people die, But I saw it all through different eyes now. Death wasn't the end anymore. It was a doorway, a transition. Not something to be fought against at all costs, but something to be faced with hope. The people I couldn't save weren't just gone, weren't just ceasing to exist, weren't just becoming nothing. They were somewhere. And what I did mattered, not because I was fighting against meaninglessness, but because every person had eternal value. Every life I saved was a life that got more time to find Jesus, more time to discover the truth, more time to prepare for eternity. Every death I witnessed was someone stepping through that doorway, going to wherever they'd chosen to go. I started praying with patience when they asked, started being honest when people asked if I believed in God. Before, I would have said, no, but if it brings you comfort, that's fine. Now I said, yes, I do. I believe in Jesus. Can I pray for you? And some people looked at me like I was crazy. Some people were just surprised. But some people, the ones who were dying, the ones who were terrified, the ones who felt alone, they'd grab my hand and say, yes, please, pray for me. And I would. Right there in the trauma bay, in the ICU, in the hallway, wherever. I'd pray. My colleagues noticed. Of course they noticed. Dr. Sarah Chen, Ice Queen, atheist extraordinaire, hard-nosed scientist, was suddenly talking about Jesus, was suddenly praying with patience, was suddenly different. Some of them were supportive. A few were Christians themselves, quiet about it in such a secular environment, and they welcomed me with open arms. Dr. Patricia Okafor, the trauma surgeon, pulled me aside one day and said, I heard you found Jesus, or he found you. Welcome to the club. It's lonely sometimes, being a Christian in medicine. I'm glad you're here. But others looked at me like I'd betrayed everything we stood for, like I'd abandoned reason for superstition, like I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown and needed intervention. One of my closest colleagues, Dr. Michael Torres, someone I'd worked with for 6 years, took me out for coffee 2 weeks after my conversion. We went to the cafe across from the hospital, sat outside even though it was raining lightly, typical Seattle weather. He looked worried, genuinely concerned. Sarah, he said, stirring his coffee, not looking at me. I've been hearing things about you talking about God with patience, praying, and I need to know, are you okay? I'm better than I've ever been, I said. You're a scientist, he said, finally looking up at me. You're one of the best doctors I know. How can you believe in a virgin birth and a resurrection? How can you throw away everything we know about biology and physics? How can you believe in miracles when we both know the universe operates according to natural laws? I haven't thrown away anything, I told him. I still believe in biology and physics. I still practice evidence-based medicine. I just don't believe they're all there is anymore. I've seen too much to believe that. I've watched too many people die, seeing something that gave them peace, something that transformed everything about how they faced death. And it was always Jesus, always him. I can't explain that away anymore, Mike. I can't keep pretending it's just neurons and chemicals when the evidence points somewhere else. He shook his head slowly. You're having a breakdown, Sarah. You've seen too much death, and it's broken something in you. You're trying to make sense of senseless suffering by inventing meaning that isn't there. You need therapy, not religion. You need to talk to someone. I am talking to someone, I said. I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to tell you that I'm not broken. Or maybe I am broken, but Jesus is fixing me. I'm not delusional. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm just finally seeing clearly for the first time in my life. I hope you're right, he said quietly, because from where I'm sitting, I'm watching a brilliant colleague destroy her credibility and her career over a delusion. That hurt. God, it hurt. Because Mike was a friend. Because he cared about me. Because he was genuinely worried. But he couldn't see what I saw, couldn't understand what I'd experienced, and I couldn't make him understand. All I could do was live my life and hope that eventually he'd see the change in me and wonder what caused it. My family was harder, so much harder. I waited 3 weeks to tell them. I knew it would be bad. I knew they'd be disappointed. But I also knew I couldn't hide it forever, and I didn't want to. I called them on a Saturday afternoon. My parents were together. They always were on Saturdays, probably reading or working on some project. They put me on speakerphone. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something," I said, my heart pounding. "And you're not going to like it, but it's important. It's the most important thing that's ever happened to me." There was a pause. Then my father said, "What is it, Sarah? Are you sick?" "No, I'm not sick. I've become a Christian. I believe in Jesus. I gave my life to him. I'm following him now." The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched for 10 seconds. 20. 30. I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was cold, controlled, disappointed. "Sarah, you're one of the smartest people I know. This is beneath you. This is for people who need a crutch to get through life. People who aren't strong enough to face reality. You're better than this." "Maybe I need a crutch, Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "Maybe we all do. Maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's just honesty. Maybe admitting you need something beyond yourself is the strongest thing you can do." My mother got on the line. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, sharper than my father's, more personal. "Sarah, we raised you better than this. We gave you the best education. We taught you to think critically, to value evidence, to not believe in fairy tales. And this is what you do with it? You throw it all away for a religion that requires you to abandon reason?" "You raised me to follow the evidence wherever it leads," I said, fighting back tears. "I am. The evidence led me to Jesus. I know you don't understand. I know you think I've lost my mind. But I'm asking you to trust that I didn't make this decision lightly. I investigated. I questioned. I studied. And everything I found pointed to the truth of Christianity. Everything I've witnessed in 15 years of watching people die points to the truth of Jesus. I can't ignore that anymore." "Then you've become exactly what we tried to protect you from," my mother said. "Delusional, irrational, a disappointment." That word hung in the air. Disappointment. My mother, who'd always been proud of me, who'd bragged about me to her colleagues, who'd celebrated every achievement, every degree, every promotion, thought I was a disappointment now. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "I love you both. And I'm going to keep loving you, but I can't unknow what I know now. I can't unsee what I've seen. Jesus is real, and I'm following him, whether you understand or not." My father sighed. "We need some time, Sarah. Don't call for a while. Let us process this." They hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face, and I felt the cost of following Jesus for the first time. Really felt it. The loss, the rejection, the breaking of relationships that had been foundational to my entire life. We didn't speak for 4 months after that. No calls, no emails, no text, nothing. On my 38th birthday, which came 2 months after that phone call, I didn't hear from them. For the first time in my life, my birthday passed without a word from my parents. It hurt. God, it hurt. It still hurts. Even now, 2 years later, our relationship has never fully recovered. We talk now occasionally. Holidays, birthdays, Brief, polite conversations that stay away from anything meaningful. They came to visit once, stayed for a weekend, were cordial but distant, like I'm someone they used to know, like I'm a stranger who happens to share their DNA. It aches every single time. Every phone call that doesn't happen. Every holiday that's awkward and strained. Every moment when I want to share something with them, and I know they won't understand. The cost of following Jesus isn't theoretical for me. It's real, it's painful, it's ongoing. But the church community embraced me immediately. People I barely knew invited me to dinners, to Bible studies, to prayer groups, to coffee. A woman named Grace Thompson, who'd been a believer for 40 years, who'd raised 3 kids and buried a husband and weathered 1,000 storms, took me under her wing. She invited me to lunch after church one Sunday, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. "It's going to be hard," she told me, her eyes kind and knowing. "Following Jesus costs something. He said it would. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." That's not poetry. That's reality. You'll lose things. You'll lose people. You'll face rejection and misunderstanding and mockery. But Sarah, he's worth it. I promise you, he's worth every single thing you'll lose. Because what you gain is infinitely greater. You gain him. You gain eternal life. You gain purpose and hope and love that never ends. You gain a family that will never leave you. You gain everything that actually matters. She was right on both counts. Following Jesus cost me. It cost me my relationship with my parents. It cost me some friendships. It cost me the respect of colleagues who thought I'd abandoned reason. It cost me the certainty and confidence I used to have in my own understanding. But I gained something infinitely greater. I gained purpose. I gained hope. I gained the absolute certainty that death is not the end, that the people I lose are not lost, that this life is not all there is, that suffering is not meaningless. I gained Jesus, and Jesus, it turns out, was what I'd been looking for my entire life without knowing it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about conversion. It's not a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Every shift, when I see suffering that makes no sense, when I watch good people die and bad people live, when a child comes in with cancer and I have to tell parents their baby isn't going to make it, when the unfairness of it all threatens to swallow me whole, I have to choose to trust, to believe that God is good even when I can't see it, to believe that He has a plan even when everything looks like chaos, to believe that He's working even when it feels like He's absent. Some days it's easy. Some days I feel His presence so strongly I could weep with gratitude. I'll be in the middle of a shift and suddenly feel overwhelmed with the awareness that He's there, that He's with me, that I'm not alone, that I'm doing His work. I'll watch someone survive against impossible odds and know, just know, that it was Him. I'll watch someone die in peace and know they're with Him now. Those days are gifts. Other days it's hard. Other days I wrestle with doubt, with anger, with questions that don't have easy answers. Why did that child die? Why didn't you heal them? Why do you let so much suffering happen? Where are you in the midst of all this pain? Those days I cling to what I know to be true, even when I don't feel it. I cling to the reality of the empty tomb. I cling to the testimony of Scripture. I cling to the transformation in my own life. I cling to the hope that He promises, even when everything around me looks hopeless. But I keep coming back to what I know. I've watched 1,000 people die, and the ones who knew Jesus died differently. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to be undeniable. They died with peace. They died with hope. They died like they were going somewhere beautiful, like they were going home. And I've felt His presence in my own life, in ways I can't explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. the peace that doesn't make sense given my circumstances, the comfort in the middle of grief, the certainty that I'm not alone, even in the darkest moments, the gradual transformation of my heart from stone to something that can finally feel again, that can finally love again, that can finally hope again. Last month, I was working overnight when we got a 24-year-old woman, car accident, hit by a drunk driver at an intersection. Massive internal injuries. We did everything we could. IV fluids, blood transfusions, emergency surgery. But she was dying. We all knew it. The damage was too extensive. She was conscious, barely, and terrified. Her name was Jessica. "I don't want to die," she kept saying, tears streaming down her face, her voice weak. "I'm not ready. I don't want to die. Please don't let me die." I held her hand, the way I've held so many hands. "Jessica, can I pray with you?" She nodded frantically. "Yes, please. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." I prayed for her, right there in Trauma Bay 2, with nurses rushing around us, with machines beeping, with everything clinical and harsh and fluorescent. I prayed. I told her about Jesus, about how he died so we could live, about how he conquered death, about how all she had to do was believe in him, trust in him, and she'd be okay. She'd be more than okay. She'd be with him. "Do you believe Jesus is who he said he was?" I asked her. "Do you believe he died for your sins and rose from the dead?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I never thought about it. I never went to church. But I want to. I want to believe. I don't want to go into nothing." "Then believe," I said. "Just believe. Tell him. Tell him you believe and you need him." "Jesus," she whispered, her voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the monitors. "I believe. I don't understand everything, but I believe. Help me. Please help me. I'm so scared. Take care of my family. Forgive me. Save me." She died 2 minutes later, but the fear was gone. She died with her eyes closed and her hand in mine and peace on her face. Peace that hadn't been there before. Peace that made no medical sense given her injuries, given the pain she must have been in, but peace nonetheless. I don't know what her eternity would have looked like if I'd still been the atheist doctor who thought prayer was pointless superstition. I don't know if God used me in that moment, or if she would have found him anyway. But I know I got to be part of something eternal. I know that my life, my career, my 1,000 deaths, all of it has meaning now, because it's all in his hands. All of it is part of his plan. All of it matters because he says it matters. I'm still a doctor. I still lose patients. I still come home exhausted and covered in other people's blood and trauma. I still see things that haunt me. I still have shifts where I question everything, where the suffering seems pointless and God seems distant, and I wonder if I made a terrible mistake. But I'm not empty anymore. I'm not alone anymore. I know where I'm going when I die. I know that every person I meet has eternal value, that they're not just biological machines, but souls created in the image of God. I know that love is not just chemistry, and sacrifice is not just evolutionary altruism, and hope is not just a neurological trick. I know that the universe is not indifferent, that there is a purpose, that there is a plan, even when I can't see it. I know Jesus is real, not because someone told me, not because I was raised to believe it, but because I've seen him in the faces of the dying, in the impossible peace, in the transformation of my own heart from stone to flesh, from death to life, in the empty tomb that changed everything, in the historical evidence that points to resurrection, in the testimony of billions of believers across 2,000 years, in the still, small voice that speaks in the quiet moments when I stop running and finally listen, If you're watching this and you're where I was 3 years ago, if you've built your whole life on the certainty that this is all there is, if you're exhausted by the meaninglessness of it all, if you're haunted by death and suffering and the cold indifference of the universe, I want you to know something. You're not crazy for questioning. You're not weak for wondering if there's more. You're not betraying your intellect by investigating the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the Christians are right. Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." That's either the most arrogant, delusional claim ever made by a human being, or it's the truest thing ever spoken. There's no middle ground. C.S. Lewis was right about that. Jesus can't just be a good moral teacher. Good moral teachers don't claim to be God. Either he was who he said he was, or he was crazy, or he was lying. Those are the only options. And I spent 15 years believing it was delusion. Spent 15 years thinking Christians were weak people who couldn't handle reality, who needed a comforting fairy tale to get through life. Now I know it's truth. The deepest, most profound truth in the universe. Jesus is who he said he was. He died and rose again. He conquered death. And he offers that same victory, that same eternal life, to anyone who believes in him. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. I still struggle with questions about suffering, about why God allows so much pain, about why some people get healed and others don't, about why he intervenes sometimes and not others, about the problem of evil, about all the hard questions that have stumped theologians for centuries. But I know the one who has the answers, and I know he's good, even when I can't understand his ways, even when his plans don't make sense to me, even when everything around me is falling apart. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've listened to this whole thing, if something in this resonated with you, if it stirred something in your heart or your mind or your soul, would you do me a favor? Would you subscribe to this channel? These testimonies matter. Every person who hears about what Jesus has done in someone's life, every person who hears that there's hope beyond death, that there's meaning beyond meaninglessness, that there's a God who loves them and died for them, is another person who might find their way home. You subscribing, you sharing this, you telling someone else about it, it could be the thing that reaches someone who's desperate and alone and about to give up. It could be the thing that saves someone's life, not just physically, but eternally. So please, if this meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. Let's reach as many people as we can with the truth that changed my life. The truth that Jesus is real, and he's waiting for anyone who will come to him. I was 37 years old when I stopped counting deaths and started counting grace. When I stopped seeing endings and started seeing doorways. When I stopped believing in nothing and started believing in the one who conquered death itself. When I stopped being a prisoner of my own certainty and became free in the truth. His name is Jesus. He's real. He's alive. He's waiting, and he can handle your doubts, your questions, your skepticism, your broken places, your fears, your anger, your confusion. I know because he handled mine. He took this arrogant, atheist, ice queen doctor who thought she had the universe figured out, and he transformed her into someone who can finally see, finally hope, finally love, finally believe. Thank you for listening to my story. Whatever you're facing today, whatever darkness you're walking through, whatever questions you're wrestling with, wherever you are in your own journey toward truth, I'm praying for you. I'm praying that you'll have the courage to investigate, to question your own certainty, to consider the possibility that maybe you don't have it all figured out either, to open the door when Jesus knocks, because he's been knocking your whole life, patiently waiting for you to let him in. And if you're ready to take that step, if you're ready to find out if Jesus is really who he says he is, just ask him. Just pray. Just say, Jesus, if you're real, show me. I want to know the truth. He'll answer. I promise you, from the bottom of my transformed heart, He'll answer. He answered me, and I was as far from him as anyone could be. But he came for me anyway. He pursued me. He waited for me. He loved me even when I hated him. And he'll do the same for you. His name is Jesus, and he changes everything,